Hello, welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage. It was a nice Tuesday, slightly overcast. Nothing went according to plan, just another day for me. Sunday morning, when I shot my last video, my faithful friend, everybody has a word they can't say, my faithful friend, for over 415 videos, it was a super cheap, tiny tripod that I bought probably on Amazon the day I decided I was going to make YouTube videos. And it finally gave up the ghost right in that little joint right there. You put a little stress on that when you stretch out. This was a spring-loaded phone holder, which turns out I like this feature. The new tripod that you're on now has a screw at the top, and instead of being only this long, it stands on the floor. So your perspective right now looks only slightly different, but in the future I'll be able to stand you up everywhere. So if nothing else, you can look forward, hopefully, to different perspectives. Maybe it was getting old and this is a good thing. Also, this Bluetooth button that used to turn it off and on, if I ramble on too much, it shuts off by itself. The new one, the new fob, while bigger, has a switch on the side. I'll probably forget and leave it on all the time and run the battery out, but I think it'll keep going, but I might have to point it at you to make it work. So bear with me while we work through our growing pains. So 415 videos published. That's about 1,000 videos total, because a lot of them get scrapped. I don't even want to think about how many small takes that is. Got to be in the 5,000 or 6,000 range, so that's a lot. Today's subject is the legendary 4500 series Holley Dominator carburetor. An impressive piece of machinery. I have loved them since I first saw them in the Holley repair manual book that was a gift given to me at a very young age. My first exposure to any Holley carburetor was in the junk drawer in the back room of my parents' garage, where my brother had put the instruction sheet to his, I believe it was a 750 Holley. I could be wrong. He'll probably correct me, but it was a instruction sheet for a Holley double pumper. Wherever it came from, I read the thing front to back. I was a sponge for any information. But those are the 4150 and 4160 square bore Holleys that we're all familiar with. Much more exotic in 1969, rumored to be maybe mysteriously used in 68, but 1969 Ford paid for most of the development and had them on the NASCAR cars and worked their way into Trans Am. I think American Motors was the second manufacturer to use it. And eventually, this is right on 1970 when Pro Stock NHRA drag racing started, and pretty much from day one, every Pro Stocker, until they went to EFI only a few years ago, had a pair of Holley 4500 Dominators. Very interesting carburetor. See, I'm trying to point at you. It's going to take a little bit to get smooth using my new device. The early model Holley Dominators had this raised air horn and a much more detailed booster inside. Let's remove it from the manifold. Interesting to note on the manifold, the Dominator pattern flange is much bigger than the standard square bore. Dominator flange is unique all by itself. The early carburetors, you have to be careful. The linkage for the secondaries is right here. It can fall into your manifold and cause destruction. There's Allen-headed bolts and pieces of metal that can fall inside. So they quickly came out with typically a 4-hole gasket, a metal shear plate that covers all this, and another gasket, and then you bolt it on your manifold so the plate will contain all the extra parts. All Holley Dominators, until they started making the 1250, so I'm talking about initially the 1150 and 1050, and then they made the 750, they still all have a 2-inch throttle blade. They made the difference up, and it's hard to tell because this particular early Dominator has these chrome velocity stacks, which are not part of the deal. This is something somebody's added on. Typically, you just have the raised booster, raised air horn, but the booster itself, they ran a skirted booster on the 750 to reduce airflow. Pretty unique. You would think the throttle blades would be smaller, which is typical on the 4150 and 60 style carburetors, but in this case, they did it all up here. While I got it upside down, the 50cc accelerator pumps were actually off in like an industrial carburetor, probably off a dump truck. And Holley just is really good about picking and choosing their parts that have the performance built in, but originally probably built for another application. So they used them, and I've never seen a Holley Dominator, and they never produced it that I'm aware of with the smaller accelerator pumps. Always had the big ones. Another characteristic that I've always liked about the Holley Dominator is you have idle speed adjustment both on the primary and the secondary throttle blades. And this particular carburetor also has holes in the primary butterflies. I find it hard to believe you would need them, but I think you have enough airflow as it is. But I guess until I rebuild it and put it on the engine, we'll wait to see. That's your primary stroke before it engages the whole thing. Think of these carburetors as big and lazy. They're made mostly to run wide open. They were never really imagined for street use, and a lot of transition from idle pot throttle to full throttle. They're typically idle and wide open. But they have all the features needed, if you're willing to put the work in, to make this a pretty streetable carburetor if that is your goal. Lots of people do that with great success. I ran 2 of these. They were made by Barry Grant, but they were still based on the Holley Dominator. I think he had them listed at 1230 CFM, and they work flawless. I don't think, and if you listen to guys like Warren Johnson, the professor of Pro Stock, he'll tell you that Pro Stock would be going much faster if they stuck with carburetors, but they wanted to, become modern, and they hung on to the Holley Dominators many, many years, decades after fuel injection became mainstream. But you still see a lot of Holley Dominators making big power. Another unique feature to the 4500 series Holley Dominator is the fuel bowl can be fed from either side. There's a block-off plate on the side you're not using, so you could have the fuel line on either side. This particular fuel line is an absolute monstrosity with about 14 chances of leaking. Also, now this carburetor I picked up used, obviously, just last weekend. I haven't even so much as cleaned it off, but I can tell you it has a few warning signs for me. It has the late model screws in it, the hex head. This carburetor is old enough. I believe it's maybe a 74. It should have the slotted regular screwdriver head, not the hex head. I prefer the hex head, but that means somebody has been in here. And God only knows what I'm going to find. Sadly, I buy a lot of used parts that a lot of stuff is, let's just say the questionable judgment was used. Some people forge ahead and you got to love them for that, but maybe a book would have been helpful at some point. Maybe, study what you're working on and try to leave it better than you found it. So, but I guess if the price is right, you can overcome it unless something's completely stripped out or damaged. I've spent my life, because I'm pretty much, low buck Chuck, fixing old junk. So if it didn't come broken and messed up, I wouldn't know what to do. Fortunately, if you're interested in this style of carburetor, they're still made with great fanfare in much bigger sizes. You can get them, oh my God, big, 1450, 1650. And you have options that we need to cover. You'll see them advertised as 2-circuit and 3-circuit. Now, originally, people thought that meant whether it had a power valve on the metering block or not, but it doesn't. When Holley themselves say they have a 2-circuit Holley Dominator, they're talking about the idle circuit and then all the main circuits combined, whether it has a power valve, transfer slots, main jet, whatever. They categorize that as idle and main. That's what this is. That's what most of your carburetors that you're familiar with. They call them 2-circuit carburetors. When you see a 3-circuit advertised, what that means is there are actual tubes coming from the liquid fuel bowl, and they are stuck inside the venturi. And when airspeed is correct, it will either flow or not. It's just a tube full of raw fuel. It's tunable with an air bleed as to how much and how it performs. And out of the box, if you tried to drive it on the street, it might be really rich. But once again, they've given you tunability, and a lot of people take a 3-circuit carburetor and make it really responsive, and believe it or not, some people even tune them for gas mileage, which is kind of hard to believe. But so when you're talking 3-circuit carburetors, be aware that it's taking what we're going to categorize as a big lazy carburetor that can be made to run really crisp. I mean, these things run awesome, but compared to a smaller carburetor, there's just more to deal with. Just the idle circuit alone on one of these is probably 30% bigger than a 750 Holley. So that's more fuel and more air to deal with. So you really need a pretty big or high RPM engine underneath. Big is usually the answer. So, and that's in the 2-circuit version, you have a lot to deal with. You add that extra, basically, tube full of raw fuel that's going to come out at different airflows. That's a lot of fuel, potentially. Also the potential to make a lot of power. So, this carburetor, I'll take it apart and make something of it. I'm slowly collecting more Holleys because I love them. Most of them I've got lots of smaller pairs, 350s, 450s, 600s. I had a mint pair of 750s, but I let them go. Double pumpers for a tunnel ram I was going to use. My first car, my red Chevelle, when I built the 572 for that, I came up with a pair of 1150s for that. I don't remember where I got them now, but they were a matched pair, probably a swap meet. And the Barry Grant carburetors that I was talking about, those definitely came from a racer at New England Dragway. He had them for sale on his trailer. And I didn't have the money for them, but I left a deposit, and I'd seen him there for years. I didn't know him, but he races there all the time, and I've never once had a problem buying stuff from another racer. Back before the internet, I would put money in an envelope and mail it to people that were advertising in the back of National Dragster. That's how I built my first 572. I sent money away for a BRC crankshaft, and set of BRC rods, and I just sent the guy cash in an envelope, and my pot showed up just like that. No drama, different world. Nowadays, you have to be careful everywhere, but that's a whole other subject, isn't it? So back to this particular carburetor just for a minute. I think I mentioned it's a 1050, only has front idle mixture screws. It's not four corner idle. When you have them front and back, that's what it's called, four corner idle, so you can adjust all of them. It only has them in the front, and I don't know if it has power valves or not. I haven't taken it apart, so I do know the seals are wrong on the bolts. They're missing stuff, but all in all, the carburetor looks nice, believe it or not. I mean, I don't know what the camera's making it look like, but I bought a lot worse. So, and the cool little velocity stacks, there's nothing holding them on right now. They're just driven in the hole, and there should be a piece here in the middle with some kind of wing nut or something to hold it together. So that's kind of scary, but it does give it a pretty cool look. So that's it for tonight. I'm going to put this piece of junk away. It was sitting on the bench, and I think, you know what? Let's talk about one of my favorite subjects. Have a good night. Let me click you off. It didn't work.